We all say the creed together when we gather on Sunday morning. We say a slightly different creed than if we come at 8 o'clock, but they're not too far apart. So the creeds are familiar to us, but often the things that are most familiar to us also begin to wash over us, and they become so familiar that we can begin going through the motions and not really thinking about what we're doing. And so it's worth stopping and asking about the creed as well. What exactly is this thing we're saying? What is a creed, anyway? Yes, Creed is a 90s grunge band. And I can separate out the generations by who got that joke. But the term creed comes from the Latin word credo, or credo, which just means I believe. And that's the first word of most, if not all, creeds in the Christian tradition. It's a statement of what we believe. It's similar to a statement of faith, similar to a catechism, but shorter. Usually those are long documents. If somebody goes through the rite of Christian initiation in the Catholic Church, they have to learn the whole catechism of the Catholic Church, or there's a large Lutheran catechism. But a creed is something that's very short, that you can say fairly quickly together. And it's meant to be a summary of what we believe in condensed form. It's like distilled essence of our beliefs. It was originally meant, probably all of the creeds we use now were originally meant to be used in baptism. So this was something that baptismal candidates would learn and would confess, would say out as part of the baptismal ceremony, and probably with the rest of the congregation gathered there saying it together. So if baptism represented their entry into the church, there was a sense then that the creed summed up what it meant to be part of this community, to be part of the church. Being part of the church means believing these things. These are ancient statements. I was talking to somebody after the 8 o'clock service about how there are very few other things anywhere in our society that are as old as the creeds are. In the Book of Common Prayer, the creed found there is the Nicene Creed. And the Nicene Creed is called that because it was formulated by a gathering of bishops from all over the Christian world at that point, the known world, who all came together at the little town of Nicaea in 325 AD and produced what was really the answer to a crisis in the church's life. And that crisis was around what we now know as the doctrine of the Trinity. There were a group of bishops who had been teaching that Jesus wasn't fully God. They weren't just saying he was an ordinary human being. They said, yes, he created the rest of the world, but he was still a created being underneath God, above everything else, but still a little bit underneath God. And today, that's the same understanding of Jesus that we find in Jehovah's Witness doctrine. Well, in response to that, the large majority of the bishops at that gathering said, no, that's not faithful to our memory of the apostles' teaching. That's not what the apostles handed down to us. We can't get around the identity of Jesus, the man with God, even if we don't understand it. And so in order to protect that old understanding of Jesus as fully God, they shaped this creed. That Nicene Creed was largely just focused around the Trinity. It didn't say a whole lot about other things. And so in 381, about 60 years later, the next gathering of all the bishops, which was in the city of Constantinople, or modern-day Istanbul, that council agreed to expand the Nicene Creed into a fuller form that was a little bit more balanced. It said something more about the church and about salvation and the life to come and the sorts of things that we find now in the Creed in the Book of Common Prayer. And so technically, if you open up the little red Book of Common Prayer, the Creed in there is called the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed. But the fact that even I have trouble saying Constantinopolitan is why, for short, we still call it the Nicene Creed. But that dates to 381 AD. That makes it over 1,600 years old. And how many other things do we have that are 1,600 years old? Sometimes I feel 1,600 years old when I get up in the morning, but that's different. The other creed that we use, and the creed that we use in our service at 9 o'clock and at 11, this creed that's in the Book of Alternative Services, is called the Apostles' Creed. And that is actually an even older statement. It's not as clear about the idea of the Trinity because it wasn't shaped around a Trinitarian conflict, a fight about the Trinity. It came before the fights about the Trinity. And that creed, in its earliest form, we have evidence of it as far back as the year 215 AD. And Hippolytus, who is at that point the Bishop of Rome, writes in one of his writings about the baptismal service and provides for us the question and answer responses that he had his baptismal candidates affirm during baptism, during the baptismal ceremony. And although it was in a question-answer format, it was very, very close to the wording of the Apostles' Creed. So if Hippolytus mentions this just kind of in passing, then probably the Apostles' Creed in its basic form originated sometime in the 2nd century. So sometime within 100 years of the writing of the Gospel of John, for example. So we're talking very, very early, back far enough that people were still remembering the oral teaching of the apostles. The apostles' presence in the churches, the apostles' teaching about what they remembered of Jesus was still a living tradition at that point. And really, that Apostles' Creed is one of the ways in which that 2nd century church, recognizing that the apostles have died, the students of the apostles have died, even the students of the apostles are starting to die off. We've got to preserve that memory of Jesus and the memory of what he meant, that understanding of Jesus that the apostles handed down. We've got to formulate that in a form that we can remember. And one way they did that was in gathering the books of the New Testament, but another way they did it was forming this condensed summary of what the apostles believed and what they taught the church to believe, and teaching that to people who largely couldn't read, so wouldn't be able to read the New Testament. Might hear it read on Sunday morning when they gathered together for worship, but they could remember and memorize this summary of the essence of their faith. And that was the Apostles' Creed. That Apostles' Creed didn't have exactly the wording we have now. It had the same ideas. The wording we have now dates back to at least 542. So in one sense, the Apostles' Creed is older, but the exact wording of the Apostles' Creed is younger than the exact wording of the Nicene Creed. So take your pick. They're both pretty old, and both really represent the same thing, which is an attempt to summarize up the essence of what the apostles handed down to the church. So why bother using it? I mean, one of the reasons we don't have a lot of things that are 16 or 17 or 1800 years old these days is because we figure we have better things now. So why should we still be repeating this statement that's 18 or 1700 years old? Well, the creed can be thought of like an anchor. If you anchor a boat, you don't nail it to the bottom. You don't fix it in one spot so that it can't move at all. But an anchor, it keeps the boat from drifting too far. Now, if you've ever gone canoe camping, what you don't want to happen is wake up to find your canoe on the shore on the far side of the lake because it drifted off in the middle of the night. That's bad. And an anchor, even for a canoe, just keeps the boat from drifting too far. And that's what creeds are. They're not meant to sum up everything we believe. They're not meant to answer every question. But they're meant to be an anchor, to say, this is the essential core of what the apostles taught us about Jesus, about what he means for us. And so we can argue about lots of things, we can discuss a whole lot of things, but if we continue over the centuries to say these words together, they anchor us and keep us from drifting off so that what we believe is now unrelated to what the apostles believed. And so the creed anchors us in apostolic Christianity, in apostolic faith, assuming that the apostles who were with Jesus, who Jesus chose as his representatives to the world, are our best window onto who Jesus was and what he meant. A creed is also, though, a bit like a scar, because creeds are born out of conflict. I referred earlier to the Trinitarian conflict over whether Jesus was really truly God or not. And that was what gave birth to the Nicene Creed. There was, earlier in the 2nd century, conflict over whether the Old Testament was really revealed by representing the same God as the New Testament. And there were some people in the Greek world who wanted to reject Israel's tradition and just keep Jesus. And the Apostles' Creed was born out of conflicts like that. We don't know exactly where it arose, but it was that kind of conflict in the 2nd century that produced the Apostles' Creed. And scars are important. We don't always like how they look, but some scars become a part of our identity, don't they? Harrison Ford has that scar on his chin. And have you ever noticed how many of Harrison Ford's movies somehow make reference to how he got that scar? Watch some of them. And the Indiana Jones movies talk about them. There's reference to them, I believe, in the Star Wars movies. I have a scar that you can't see here because it's covered with hair now, but it's on my bottom lip right here. I got that scar when I was about 4, and I was walking across the piano bench at home and arranging Christmas cards on the top of the piano bench. And I got to the end and wasn't looking, and I stepped right off the end of the piano bench. And on the way down, I caught my lower lip and my upper teeth right on the arm of the piano. And until recently, my dad had that piano, and you could see the dent of my teeth in the arm. And my teeth went right through my lower lip down here. And my parents ran outside and got snow because it was winter and packed my mouth with snow, and it was fine. But I remembered that accident, and I was very careful around pianos after that. And scars do that for us, don't they? They are reminders to us of something traumatic, but often that reminder is important. It reminds us of bad decisions we made. It reminds us of close calls we had. And creeds are like that too. They're scars in the church's liturgy that remind us of close calls, remind us of when we almost got it wrong, and so warn us against not making the same mistakes again. Sometimes a creed can be a bit like a stretcher, because I think if we're honest, many of us come to church sometimes thinking, why am I here? Thinking, I don't know if I really believe any of this stuff. Thinking, I feel like a hypocrite when I'm saying this creed, because I'm saying I believe all these things, and right now, maybe I don't know whether I believe any of these things. That kind of struggle, whether it's struggle with pain we're suffering or struggle with intellectual uncertainties, that's part of faith too. And a creed, in my experience, has been important because sometimes it carries me through those times when I don't have a lot of faith as a feeling inside me. I don't necessarily feel like I trust Jesus very much. I don't necessarily feel at that moment like I'm certain about what I'm saying in the creeds. But I decide to say the creed out of hope and trust that this is something passing and that God will meet me on the other side of it, and that it's the God of this creed who will meet me on the other side of it. And that's genuine faith, not the absence of the doubt, not never struggling, but allowing the creed and other parts of our liturgy to be like a stretcher, that when we can't generate the feeling of faith inside us, can carry us through until we begin to feel that trust in Christ again. So a creed can be like a stretcher for us. And creeds can be kind of like vitamins that give us strength, or like iron in our diet that keeps us from being anemic. Pretty well every generation in the church has dealt with a situation where something about Christian faith, Christian beliefs, seems weird to the world around them. And I don't think we're any different than that, are we? And I would be willing to bet that at least sometimes at work, in the office, or with your family, or walking down the street, or when you're watching TV, there will be a moment when you think, how can all of this be true? Because everybody else seems to think it's just crazy. Whether it's the idea of the uniqueness of Jesus, whether it's the idea of Jesus' divinity, whatever it is that our generation gets hung up on, there's always pressure from outside of us, from the people who, one way or another, let us know that they think this is just insane. Or maybe even evil, destructive, pernicious. Sociologists have taught us that that makes it hard for us to believe. It's hard for us to believe when everybody around us tells us that something is crazy, unbelievable, implausible. But when we come together and we say the creed together, we say together, I believe this. That support of the people around us saying, yeah, they might say it's crazy, but I believe the same thing that you believe. I believe what this creed says. That acts like iron in our diet. It acts like a vitamin that gives us the strength to be able to believe something that otherwise would just seem crazier and crazier as time goes on. And finally, creeds are like sidelines. If you've ever played soccer or football or ever watched soccer, you know that sidelines are kind of important, right? Not just to decide who gets to throw in from the sidelines, or whether you've got a toe over when you're throwing in. But our kids, each of them, when they were about 5 or 6, played soccer, community soccer. And then they all abandoned it very quickly. But in each case, at some point, there would be a kid who would make a breakaway, and he'd have his head down, and he'd be running with the ball, and would just keep going. And everybody's wondering, is it going to stop? Being a Christian doesn't mean that we all always believe the same thing. It doesn't mean that we don't argue about some of our beliefs. It doesn't mean we don't have conversations about the different ways we can make sense of our beliefs. But the creeds act like sidelines for us, so that we can be free to have that conversation and have those arguments, knowing that this is still a Christian conversation because we agree on the creeds. We agree on where those boundaries are. And we agree that once we go past that, they may be legitimate discussions, but we're not having a Christian conversation anymore. Now we're having a Buddhist conversation or a secular conversation or some other kind of conversation. But the creeds mark those boundaries. And so the creeds, I would suggest, are a gift from God that we need to come back to every week, as often as we can, as our anchor, as scars that we can remember, as a stretcher to carry us sometimes, as vitamins for our faith, and as sidelines to keep us in the game. Amen.